coming up. Hundreds of wildfires burn in Canada from May to June. Half of them, authorities say, were out of control.
This year is significantly higher as far as hectares burned.
Noxious fumes stretch far into the U.S. Northeast.
I've been here for like 40 years and I haven't seen anything like this.
Yeah.
A study released on World Oceans Day looks at increasing fish production to feed a growing global population.
A lot of animal rights organizations would say that fish are sentient beings and can feel pain and should not be killed.
Well, I mean, it's a difficult debate, a tricky one.
And it's tick season again. We'll give you the do's and don'ts to avoid these sneaky predators.
There are less mice for the ticks to feed on, and so they're looking for other blood meals from other things, including us.
This is Just 2 Degrees on TRT World.
Canada is facing an especially severe wildfire season this summer. Blazes are burning in nearly all Canadian provinces and territories. It's forced more than 120,000 people from their homes. Millions of hectares of land were burned. Oil and gas production facilities in the province of Alberta were also affected. Authorities say the country is on track for its worst ever year of wildfire destruction, as warm and dry conditions are forecast to persist through to the end of the season.
Year after year, with climate change, we're seeing more and more intense wildfires, and in places where they don't normally happen. That's why we've invested to train more community-based firefighters across the country.
And it is hot in Puerto Rico. Well, it pretty much always is. But this year, the heat is on a whole other level. Puerto Ricans have been forced to use fans and inflatable swimming pools to cope with the heat. Weather experts are baffled by the scorching heat wave that gripped the country. Temperatures soared to 52 degrees Celsius in the first week of June.
La calor aquí es terrible, no podemos soportarlo, pues la niña hay que mojarla un ratito y refrescándonos.
Pues saber que al Cabo Rojo estar ser parte de la costa con muchas playas, el sol ha estado intenso y la calor insoportable. Y hemos querido orientar a la ciudadanía sobre la importancia de protegerse y tomar las medidas en esta ola de calor que estamos viviendo, que se espera que sea aún mayor.
You know, we've often talked about how the oceans are affected by warming temperatures, but that's not the only problem the seas are faced with. Overfishing is an issue governments are under pressure to get under control. But on World Oceans Day this year, some figures were announced that suggest there was more to sustainable fishing than just preserving depleted marine stocks.
In its latest report, the Marine Stewardship Council reveals that more than 1/3 of the world's fish stocks are being overfished beyond their ability to recover their numbers. But the Council points to more sustainable fishing practices for wild fisheries, so much so that it estimates global fisheries managed with sustainable practices would yield an increased 16 million tons more seafood for harvest every year globally. The importance of consuming sustainable sources of seafood is not only listed as crucial to preserve vital marine ecosystems, but also to feed millions suffering from malnutrition around the world. With more than 1/3 of the world's population unable to afford a healthy diet, the extra yield could supplement tens of millions of people suffering from iron, vitamin B12, zinc, calcium, and omega-3 fatty acid deficiencies.
For more on this, George Clark joins us from London. He is the Programme Director at Marine Stewardship Council. Hi, George. It's good seeing you.
Hi, good to see you.
All right, as you know, a lot of people are promoting a strictly vegan diet these days. But according to your organization, because of this growing population, which is expected to reach 10 billion by the year 2050, seafood is pivotal to feeding everyone. Talk about that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, over 1 billion people rely on fish and seafood as a primary source of protein in their diets. And I think it's important to recognize the value and the importance of seafood in a healthy diet going into the future, where we're expecting the demand on seafood and the population increases to be quite substantial.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about the effects of bottom trawling, longline fishing, which unintentionally captures different species not meant to be caught. Bottom trawling destroys the ocean floor. Considering what these things do to ocean ecosystems, is sustainable fishing, quote unquote, really sustainable?
Absolutely. I think the realities of all food production is that there are impacts. The important thing in terms of approaching food production in a responsible way is to ensure that those impacts are reduced and mitigated as far as possible. The realities of our food system are that production occurs on a vast scale to sustain the population and health and hunger demands that we have on this planet. And so it's important to not look at fishing as a yes and no environment and space for solutions, but to try to find ways to improve the entirety of the fishing industry on a global level. And that's what we try to do at the MSC.
Can you get a bit more into that? Because according to your report, of course, by the Marine Stewardship Council, scientists working on what's called the Blue Food Assessment found that production of aquatic foods is generally less environmentally harmful than the production of most land-based animals. How so?
Well, exactly. If you consider that wild fishing simply involves going out with a boat and trying to catch the fish, it doesn't require the same types of inputs, the feed, the transportation on land, the water, that many on-land protein production systems do. And for that reason, it's a very carbon-friendly and certainly can be an extremely carbon-friendly protein source. And so that's what we're trying to highlight as well, that not only is sustainable fishing good for the planet and good for the health of people, but it also is good for the the carbon track record and life cycle of these types of food systems. So it's a very, very good source of protein and one that can be very climate friendly as well compared to other sources.
Can you talk a bit about fish farmers in general, how much land they require, how much water is required, the use of chemicals, if any at all?
Yeah, so I mean, fish farming, like wild fishing, comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, so it's very difficult to generalize. At MSC, we focus on wild capture fishing, but there are other organizations that work very hard to create responsible standards for fish farming as well, like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. It plays a similar role as we do in the fish farming space. So it's, again, important to recognize that half the fish production globally is from farmed sources and half the fish production is from wild sources. And so it's really, really important, imperative, in fact, that we have good, credible standards for both those production systems to ensure that those impacts can be reduced as far as possible.
What is the Marine Stewardship Council's stance on the idea that we really should not be consuming animals at all if we do want to get serious about protecting the environment?
Well, I think as the report shows, there's huge nutritional benefit from eating fish and seafood, aquatic foods. There is an opportunity to support the growing demands of an increasing global population through aquatic food production. And I think our report really highlights that through sustainable management of fisheries, where at the moment the direction is going in the wrong way. Over a third of fish stocks globally are considered unsustainably exploited. But if we can manage those sustainably, we can actually increase catches and support the ever-growing demand for high-quality, environmentally friendly, low-carbon protein sources. And sitting in the UK at the moment, the government guidelines here are that you should eat 2 portions of fish per week, one of which should be an oily fish, which has all sorts of, nutritional benefits, including omega-3s. And again, that's what the report that MSC released yesterday on World Oceans Day highlights, is that there's also a health crisis as well. There's a nutrition deficiency amongst many millions of people in the global population. And so eating more fish, sustainable fish, can help support a healthy diet and reduce the risks of, some pretty serious and severe health conditions, such as strokes and heart-related issues as well.
Last question to you, George. Putting aside the nutritional benefit, a lot of animal rights organizations, which their voices are growing a lot these days, would say that fish are sentient beings and can feel pain and should not be killed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult debate, a tricky one. And I know that there are organizations working on solutions that, tackle these kind of sentience and humane welfare issues. At the moment, that's not a component of the MSC standard in terms of welfare, but it's something that is, I think, becoming more commonplace in the aquaculture space, where you have more control over the fish production. But I think that is a reality of many different types of food production, is that you are dealing with living beings, and the humane processing and harvesting of them is clearly very important to many people.
George, this is going to be my final question to you. Do you think aqua farms can help us protect the oceans, fish less where the environment needs to be protected, and just focus more on where the fish can be grown in a controlled manner?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a question of fishing less in the wild environment. We're certainly trying to demonstrate that actually, sustainable management of fisheries can enable better production, which helps local communities. It helps feed that growing demand for good sustainable proteins from wild capture. But of course, in the aquaculture space, you do need to think about those impacts, and it has to be part of that blue transformation towards utilizing more aquatic foods to feed that demand for seafood. But there are solutions there. There are very good standards out there that attempt to reduce those impacts that any type of food production can cause.
All right, great chatting with you, George. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
But as another summer comes around, we've got to warn you to keep an eye out for a very crafty predator. This one stalks its prey so well, you won't see it coming.
Ticks are parasites that are very small and difficult to see with naked eye, and mostly found feeding on their warm-blooded hosts. They have 8 legs and belong to the arthropod family, just like spiders and mites. Ticks come in different sizes and colors and can usually be found in grassy or woody areas. Ticks carry diseases from animals to animals, threatening the health of their hosts. They mostly affect livestock, dogs, and cats, besides wild animals. Their bites cause discomfort to livestock, and that affects their weight and milk production. Besides itchiness, ticks can cause deadly paralysis or transmit other diseases to dogs and sometimes cats. Ticks can be fatal to human beings too. They spread bacteria that causes diseases such as Lyme and the Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. Different regions have different types of ticks, and the illnesses they cause also vary. For instance, CCHF is endemic in Africa, the Balkans, the Middle East, and Asian countries, and has a fatality rate of up to 40%.
Climate change is certainly impacting ticks and the risk of tick-borne disease in humans. We're seeing the geographical range of ticks expand as the climate continues to warm, and therefore we're seeing new species of ticks in areas where they were not found previously. And we've had these longer warm seasons, and therefore a longer period in which ticks can seek hosts and reproduce. So that's also made their populations increase. And so these earlier springs and these later winters are great for ticks, but not great for us. To best protect yourself from ticks and tick-borne diseases, use an effective insecticide or repellent when you're outdoors, something that's EPA registered. So something that contains things like DEET, picaridin, IR 3535, or oil of lemon eucalyptus. You can also treat your clothing with a 0.5% permethrin pesticide. Ticks also, they don't jump, they don't fly, they don't fall on us from trees. They hang out at the tops of vegetation, often on trails, and they climb up us. So walking in the center of a trail, avoiding really woody or brushy areas with high grass and leaf litter is going to help. And then if you can wear long sleeves and pants when you're outdoors, that will help as well. You can also tuck your pants into your socks when you're out there. And also, be aware that smaller, more fragmented forested areas and land areas are a higher risk for ticks and tick diseases than larger, more biologically diverse forests because of the increased competition and predation of those lime reservoirs. Now, if you find a tick on you, It's an imperative to remove it quickly, as most tick-borne diseases take 24 to 48 hours of biting to transmit that disease. So timing's key. Checking for and removing any ticks, and things like showering quickly after being outdoors can help. It's going to reduce that risk of disease. Now, when you do remove a tick, if you have one on you, use clean, fine-tipped tweezers and get as close as you can to that skin surface as possible, and then pull up with steady, even pressure, being sure to not jerk or twist that tick, and then clean that area and your hands with rubbing alcohol and soap and water. And lastly, if you're in an area with high tick activity, if you experienced a recent tick bite, monitor your symptoms for up to 30 days. And if you experience things like fatigue, aches and pains, fever and chills, or maybe you develop an unexplained rash, connect with your healthcare provider for follow-up and tell them about that potential exposure you may have had.
So we can prevent a tick infection, but in this crisis of a climate we're in, there are unexpected consequences of many actions. Russia's war in Ukraine is a prime example of some paying for the actions of others. Take, for example, the destruction of the Nova-Kakhovka Dam.
In the aftermath of the collapse of the Nova-Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine, Moscow and Kiev traded blame for the disaster.
Предпринятая Киевом преднамеренная диверсия против объекта критической инфраструктуры носит крайне опасный характер и, по сути, может быть отнесена к разряду военных преступлений или терактов.
By resorting to scorched earth tactics, or in this case to flooded earth tactics, the Russian occupiers have effectively recognized that the captured territory does not belong to them and they are not able to hold these lands.
The breach has had a major impact on the course of Ukraine's counteroffensive and on its vital agricultural sector. But the sudden release of so much water has had implications that go well beyond the war.
The harm to the environment is of particular concern. Entire ecosystems are facing long-term and irreversible harm because of the floods. Animals in the Nova-Kakhovka Zoo have already died in the rising water, and this is only the beginning of harm for fauna in the south of Ukraine, along the Dnieper River and in the Black Sea. We are witnessing ecocide on a regional, not just Ukrainian scale.
The deluge has flooded surrounding towns and farmland, forcing around 1,400 people to flee their homes. It has also threatened fresh water supplies, as well as local and rare wildlife species. Civil engineers predict the dam's destruction will leak industrial chemicals and lubricants into the soil and water table, and at least 150 tons of oil from the dam itself has contaminated the Dnieper River. Ukrainian officials estimate the environmental damage itself at more than $50 million.
Звичайно великі. І я так думаю, що самостійно нам не справитися з цією проблематикою. Тут треба підтримка. Я маю на увазі самостійно не тільки громада, там район, область і держава. Тут би хотілося і допомога від представників міжнародних екологічних служб і так далі, для того, щоб ліквідувати наслідки.
And the risk of broader environmental damage looms as the clock ticks and both sides continue trading blame. Sarah Balter, Just 2 Degrees.
Many people with dark skin believe they don't need sunscreen. Well, not her, she is wearing it. Doctors say, well, particularly from the American Academy of Dermatology, that the risk is never zero, as they formed a study group in 2019 to find out how effective the current analyses for sunscreen and skin cancer are in people of color. Melanoma, the most serious type of skin cancer, develops in the cells that produce melanin, according to the National Cancer Institute, developing in about 1 in 100,000 Black Americans each year, and is far more deadly to them. Behind all this lies the damaged ozone layer, which is supposed to protect the Earth from harmful ultraviolet radiation from the sun. The good news, though, is that the ozone layer is recovering. To Central America now, Honduras has launched a plan to save Lake Joyoa, the country's largest freshwater natural reserve, which is under threat from aquaculture, agriculture, deforestation, and other environmental threats.
Located in northwestern Honduras, Lake Joyoa is the economic backbone of the region. Its watershed is home to 9 municipalities, with a population of about 75,000. The residents have long depended on it for fishing, agriculture, recreation, and tourism. But that's changing fast. Lake Kyojoa is currently experiencing eutrophication, a process by which an entire water body or parts of it becomes enriched with minerals and nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. This has resulted in blue and green algae blooming, contaminated drinking water, and scaled-back tourism in the area.
En poco tiempo vamos a contar con un charco, se puede decir, porque es muy grave la problemática que sufrimos en la zona. Tenemos que ser conscientes y llamar a la conciencia desde restauranteros, hoteleros, hasta los turistas que nos visitan, ¿verdad?
Local authorities have been trying to address the issue, but now calls to save the lake are coming from the top office.
El pueblo hondureño, por mi medio, les ordena la suspensión de las licencias de operación ambiental de la acuicultura industrial de gran escala que están destruyendo nuestro lago de Yohoa.
President Castro led a ceremony near the shores of Lake Kyojoa, where she launched a campaign to reforest the basin.
Tenemos que rescatarlo y ponerlo al servicio de la naturaleza, del medio ambiente y de los seres humanos. Aplicaremos lo que manda nuestra Constitución, lo que mandan también los convenios internacionales y nuestras leyes, cancelando los permisos y las concesiones ilegales que a gran escala destruyen el ecosistema del lago de Yohoa.
Leonidas Perdomo has fished in the lake all his life and has seen its degradation firsthand.
Nosotros todos los hondureños también poner de acuerdo a cuidar el lago, hombre. El lago es una perla de oro que nos dejó Dios. Pero no la cuidamos, hombre. Los descuidamos, por el amor de Dios. ¿Ah?
Lake Kyojoa's origin is attributed to a volcanic eruption, has an area of 89 square kilometers and an average depth of 16 meters. Its surrounding area has a rich biodiversity with almost 400 birds and 800 plant species. But if the lake is not helped, all that could end. Dominic Brian Omondi, Just 2 Degrees.
So the climate crisis is contributing to longer, more frequent and severe heat waves during summers. Bangladesh is one of the countries that's been battling its worst in about half a century.
School closures and disruptions to everyday life is the new normal in Bangladesh. The South Asian island nation is under the grip of a severe heat wave. In the first week of June, the country's northern district of Rajshahi and the capital Dhaka recorded at least 40 degrees Celsius, the highest temperature this season. The situation is getting worse, and hope is dwindling fast.
একদিকে পানির সমস্যা, একদিকে যে গরমের কোনো গরম হালান জানা গাছের ছায়া কোনো নাই, এই ধরনের সমস্যা আছে। এই গরমের মধ্যে রিক্সা চালানো খুব কঠিন। আমাদের মুরগি মনে করেন বিদ্যুতের কারণে মুরগি টিকতে পারতেছে না, মনে করেন মুরগি মারা যাইতেছে, যার কারণে কারণ থাকে না, মনে 1 ঘন্টা থাকলে 2 ঘন্টা থাকে না, রাত্রেবেলা বাসা যাইলে ঘুমাইতে পারি না, মনে কারণ নাই, যার গরমের কারণে ঘুম আসে না, খুব অসহায়ের মধ্যে আছি আমরা, খুব কষ্টতে আছি।
Bangladesh is already grappling with power cuts that have hit the economy hard in recent months. The textile industry, accounting for more than 80% of its exports, has been one of the most affected. Officials say the energy crisis will continue until late June, when monsoon rains are expected to arrive and ease up the heat. But that too could come with its own challenges. Betusar Altash, Just 2 Degrees.
And that's how we end this episode of Just 2 Degrees. Before we leave you, Australia has announced its commitment to protect the Great Barrier Reef. The news has been welcomed by UNESCO, which warns that without ambitious, rapid and sustained climate action, the world's largest coral reef could disappear entirely.